Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Vivi Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
And I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I live in Minneapolis, and so does this week's guest, Curtis Sittenfeld. And as a Minneapolitan, I've spent a lot of this week wondering, what if police here hadn't murdered George Floyd last Monday night? What if the officers responsible had been arrested and charged as soon as possible? Hell, what if the police didn't exist and had been abolished? What if I could rewind time back so far that I could see all the different possibilities? Maybe things could be different from the utterly shitty way they are right now.
I can definitely think of some things that I would change about this week, which seems like one of the worst weeks in America in my lifetime, which is longer than I would like it to be. Well, I'm happy my life is this long, but it's been a bad week. Did you ever write a novel or story that used an alternative future?
I haven't, but this week makes it seem like a really appealing thing to do. And as we teeter on the very particular political precipice of this moment, we have a guest who has done it. Curtis Sittenfeld has written a novel with a juicy alternate premise. What if Hillary Rodham had never married Bill Clinton?
Curtis is the best-selling author of 6 novels: Prep, The Man of My Dreams, American Wife, Sisterland, Eligible, and most recently, Rodham. Her first story collection, You Think It, I'll Say It, was published in 2018 and picked for Reese Witherspoon's book club. Her books have been selected by the New York Times, Time, Entertainment Weekly, and People for their 10 best books of the year lists, optioned for television and film, and translated into 30 languages. She's also our pal and a previous guest on this show. Curtis, welcome.
Thank you.
So what kind of politician is Hillary Clinton? Is it fair to call her a centrist? And if so, what is a centrist? Is that a political type or is it a personal type?
Well, I'm very flattered that you think I'm capable of answering that question. I feel like it's as if we're on Meet the Press or something, or like the three of us are on CNN. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Hillary is a centrist, but I certainly do not consider myself any kind of political expert. And yeah, it's funny to me because I've answered a lot of questions about this book so far, and I don't think anyone's asked me. Congratulations.
Kind of makes me wonder what either real Hillary or character Hillary, or I don't know how those two intersect in your mind, but what they think of Biden.
I mean, I wonder too. The weird part is, like, if you said to me, which maybe you are, if you're saying, what does Hillary think of Biden? I would say, like, I don't know. And then if you said, well, okay, can you write a short story? I'd be like, sure. like I'll make up what she thinks. And it would probably be like, you know, like it would start like, oh, like I shouldn't have eaten that quiche for lunch or something. Like, it wouldn't be like, oh, that bill he supported in, 1988.
But she does have opinions in the novel. The character Hillary Rodham has opinions of politicians. There's one politician who she thinks we'll get to later, who she thinks is disorganized, and so she joins a campaign. And I would think, I'm going to say, well, let's talk about your fictional Hillary. I think that she would be like, I ran and I lost, and now this guy is going to run, and he is so disorganized, and he can barely even say a sentence. And why? What the hell? And he's going to win. And that pisses me off. That's not fair. That's what I imagine that Hillary saying in her mind.
If the question is, are male candidates given an easier pass or held to a lower standard than female candidates running for office, I think that Hillary would probably be the least surprised person in the world that the answer is yes. It doesn't seem like the way that this election cycle has played out doesn't seem like it would be at all surprising to Hillary. I mean, at the same time, I think that she probably passionately wants Biden to be elected.
On that note, maybe to go to that fictional space in which you feel more comfortable, I wonder if you could read for us a little bit there's a passage in which she has a conversation with a political advisor who counsels her in a certain way and sort of gives us a window into that into the way in which she thinks politically about some of those opponents. And I think it would maybe like help us get into that space a little bit of thinking about fictional Hillary and her opinions.
Okay, so this is in 1991, and she's a law professor at Northwestern in Chicago. Also, hypothetically, I said to Greg over the phone, if I do decide to jump into the Senate race, how damning is it if I have a coworker, another law professor who's married and has a child, and he and I hold hands and hug in our offices, but we don't have sex and we've never kissed? After a beat, Greg said, how many people know? Besides us, I think only my friend Maureen. Ask him if he's told anyone and make sure Maureen can keep her mouth shut. She can. Confirm it. How long has it been going on? 3.5 months. You just feel each other up? Not even that. We really only hug and hold hands, and only in our offices with the doors closed. I've heard of a lot, Greg said, but I didn't know kinks could be G-rated. Stop immediately. The public can barely wrap its head around a female senator, and they're sure as shit not going to put up with a female senator who's boning someone else's husband. I'm not remotely close to boning him. The nuances of this will fall on deaf ears. Stop. By the way, I said, the reason Bill Clinton and I broke up back in 1975 is that he kept cheating on me. How ironic. Are you looking forward to 60 Minutes? The furor around the cabaret singer's charges wasn't dissipating, and Bill and Sarah Grace were going to address the controversy on an episode of 60 Minutes airing after the Super Bowl. I'm not sure I'll watch, I said. My whole family will be at my brother's, and there's no way I'm watching Bill's interview with my parents present. Then come to my place and we'll order Szechuan Wok's finest. I don't know if I want to watch. Hillary, I'm not even going to waste time pretending this is a real discussion. I hate football, so come over in the last inning or whatever they're called. When I told my parents I wouldn't be at Huey's, my father said with evident pleasure, it looks like your communist boyfriend really got his tit caught in a ringer this time, huh? By the way, I realized I said it was 1991. It's January 1992, importantly, in that passage.
I love that passage. I just want to say, like, in particular, as a fan of Katharine Graham, when I got to that particularly cruel comment from her dad, I appreciated the reference.
Oh, wait, is it the tit caught in a ringer?
Yeah.
Is he supposed to be the origin of that?
Not him. I think I'm assuming he's quoting in some way that he's like quoting Katie Graham.
I don't think that's not intentional. Wait, did she?
So that is a reference to Watergate.
But isn't that like an expression?
I have never heard it except in reference to Katie Graham.
Oh, really?
That
I heard that a lot in Kansas City.
Did you? Maybe it's
around.
Maybe it's regional. I think my personal reference to it as a kid who grew up in Maryland in the DC area and sort of the thick of that kind of journalism is that every time I see the tit in a ringer phrase, I'm like, Katie Graham.
For me, one of the pleasures of the novel is getting to know the non-political side of Hillary Clinton, even though we started off with political questions. I mean, I like the idea of imagining her saying, like, using the verb boning is a surprise. I didn't know that was what she did in her private conversations. But hey,
wait, I think it's the guy she talks to.
But doesn't she repeat it in that? I think she uses.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
She says it back to him.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's funny because I have an aunt who was a freshman at Wellesley when Hillary was a senior there, and so my aunt is one of many people that I would like ask questions. And one time I said to my aunt, would you have said fuck you to someone in the 70s if you were really angry at them? And she said no. Like, it's like, and she's no prude. So I think that like, would you have said it in college, or would you have said it, 5 years after college? I think I do have her say fuck you once, but it's years later. We work up to that. So.
That's interesting. Like, we don't really think about that as a moment of feminist evolution. Like, when is it that?
Well, you recognize that, these political figures have personal lives where they use a totally different vocabulary than the vocabulary that they use when they're speaking to everyone else. So we're not used to them using that vocabulary. Now, I think that the public, getting back to the subject that we were on about the difference between the way male and female politicians are treated, the public is used to the idea of like, a male politician cursing and saying all kinds of crazy stuff, because there have been lots of novels about that, but there aren't very many novels about female politicians and how they really personally speak. And I thought that was really one of the fascinating things, that you had to develop an internal language for Hillary. Was that, how did you do that? How did that happen?
It's interesting to think about, because I mean, weirdly, I feel like I hope I'm not presenting myself as like totally lacking in self-awareness during this conversation, but I didn't really think about, like, I definitely read a bunch of nonfiction books about female politicians, but I didn't think about this book in the context of, whether other books about female politicians exist. So a couple things. I mean, as I was saying, I read the memoirs of a bunch of female senators, including, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, and then Claire McCaskill, who unfortunately is no longer a member of the Senate, but she's a very colorful person. And then there was actually, I don't know if either of you ever listened to this, there was a podcast created by the Clinton Foundation and Hillary's campaign in like the summer and fall of 2016 called With Her. Have either of you listened to this, or did you know about it? And I listened to it not at the time, but afterwards. And it was actually revelatory for me to listen to it, because in the very first few minutes, the podcast host, who I think is a founder of, or a co-founder of, is it called Pineapple Street? It's one of those sort of podcast
Yeah, I've heard
empires.
that.
Yeah. So he lives in Brooklyn. He is sort of chatting with her, and she sounds more unguarded than I've ever heard her sound in an interview in my entire life. And I've, heard her speak in interviews for almost 30 years. And it kind of made me realize how much journalists sort of approach her with skepticism, or you can almost hear the kind of like impatience or cynicism in their tone. And then, not surprisingly, she responds in a guarded way. But because, and a critic could say like, the podcast is total propaganda. I have some feelings about that, but because she knows that clearly this is being made for her to look good, like I think she sounds more like she would sound if she were having lunch with friends or something, where she's, very smart and, kind of focused, but just more relaxed and warm.
Like, this novel gives us this great glimpse into who, we might imagine her to be when she's talking to, everyone from a staff member to whom she feels close to her housekeeper. And she has a lot of sex in this novel. She just has
Thank you for
lot of
noticing,
sex.
Sugi.
I happen to notice it comes up a couple times, and this is at odds with a lot of media portrayals of her. There's sort of the classic sort of cruel stereotype of her as frigid. And in your book and in real life, I think, the media portrays her in that way. And how did you think about approaching those scenes, and how do you think it challenges the kind of, older person trying to be cool? She ran, obviously, as, now we have all of these politicians who are older. And I think, our imaginations often don't extend to including older people as sexual beings. And then there's also kind of, her just chilling in Cedar Rapids moment. And then there's this kind of your portrayal of her as someone who's romantic and has a lot of sex. So how did you think about those scenes?
Well, okay, so the premise of the novel obviously is, what if Hillary hadn't married Bill? Like, what if she'd fallen in love with him, and, in real life he proposed twice and she said no, and then she said yes the third time, but what if she had also said no the third time? But it wasn't like I wanted to eliminate Bill from the historical record, or I wanted to eliminate him from her life. Like, I still wanted them to fall in love. And so it seemed like this really natural, organic thing that, like, for these two people in their early 20s to be really excited about each other and really smitten, and that physical chemistry seemed like a totally normal part of that. And, Yeah, I mean, so that's one thing. I guess I also would say something that's kind of interesting to me is at some point someone said something like about, haven't we all read or heard enough about like Bill Clinton and sex? And I thought, this is not Bill Clinton and sex. I mean, like, yeah, he's president and yeah, there's sex, but that's not the perspective. It's this sort of shift in perspective. I'm actually really curious because I don't, I've done a few interviews for this book, but I don't think I've been interviewed by fellow fiction writers. And in some ways, I think there's more sex in more books that's more explicit than a lot of people realize. And so I don't even think it's like the sex. I think it is maybe like the fact that it's famous people, or it's people who are now in their 70s. I mean, it's in the book, they're in their 20s, but in real life, they're in their 70s. I don't know. I mean, do you guys have an opinion on that? Do you think Hillary's a centrist? No, just kidding.
I thought the sex scenes felt totally natural, and I was really glad that they were there. And they didn't seem, they just felt like okay, that's it. I accepted it, as part of what this novel was about, and I thought it was fascinating. I thought those were all. I just thought it was good. Fiction is like, can I do this? Well, you can if the reader believes it, and the reader thinks that it's important to the novel, and it did seem to have important, relevance to the story that you were telling. So for me, it felt natural. And at times, it was funny, not the sex scenes being funny, because there's the funny sex writing part, but like she could be funny about sex. And I thought that was helpful. And I thought, it revealed character, and that's all you really care about, as a reader.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, in that there is nothing. It's been funny to read in, some places when people read the novels, they have these sort of like weird reactions to reading. I don't know if they feel like it's an invasion or if it's just simply that their imaginations don't stretch that far.
I feel, and I think that most writers feel this way, like most fiction writers. I feel like you just do what serves the novel, and like you don't sort of worry about, your own embarrassment, or I don't know, like it's kind of like you put everything into the novel, and so to me, I don't know that it's like if somebody is very hung up on the sex in the book, I mean, there's maybe like 25% of me that's like a realist and understands the way stuff has to be summarized, and that's very provocative, and but then like 75% of me thinks that's like such a sort of like facile, predictable, and even like minor thing to kind of focus on. I don't know. Do you agree with that you sort of like write the fiction and let the chips fall where they may? Or do you think that that's, I don't know, like just an idiosyncratic take on it?
I certainly think that there is something to the fact that Hillary Clinton is the central character of the novel. I mean, of course, she's not just a known figure. She's a known female figure. You're a well-known woman writer, right? If when Updike wrote about sex, that's sort of like celebrated as revelatory and so great. And, I'm glad I read the Rabbit novels. I'm also glad that you made her so human through all this. And so I do think, I certainly encourage my students, and I also attempt to draft sort of from the perspective of almost like maybe no one will read this and I'll just write it exactly the way I would like to. And then if I take something out later because I'm not sure that others will understand it in the way that I want, or that it might play in a different way than I had originally imagined, then fine. But like I throw in the kitchen sink and then I'm like, maybe I should take out this dish that seems dirty in the kitchen sink, and I should take that out of there. But by and large, you want to draft, right? Like chuck it all in there. I mean, What are you saving it for, the next book?
Yeah.
And it's important to me. It was important because one of the important parts about Hillary in her interior is that she keeps thinking she's not attractive, and she keeps being amazed that this guy, Bill Clinton, would be interested in her. And that seems like important in her like psychological development. And also a weird thing, because you were showing the novel before. I mean, I look at her picture when she's young, there's no reason for her to think that she's unattractive, it seems like to me. So it tells me something about her psychologically, right, that is interesting and helpful as part of the book.
It's interesting because the New York Times reporter Amy Chozick, who covered her 2016 campaign, says almost verbatim the thing that you just said, which is like, it's not true that he was more attractive, was or is more attractive than she is, but it's revealing that she seems to think so.
It's also revealing that so many other people seem to think so, which I just find, I mean, I think, you know, I remember hearing you talk maybe in some other interview about just writing from the perspective of a smart woman, and how many smart women don't think that they're attractive or have been conditioned. I don't know that this is the part that you said, this is the part that I started extrapolating, but you know, you were talking about, what does it mean that I haven't written from the point of view of a woman who is professionally successful in this particular way, and that there aren't a ton of novels. And then when I was reading about her, thinking so badly of her own attractiveness, and also having that reinforced by so many other people, you know, including notably in the novel, like her father, I was just thinking about all of the ways in which women are conditioned to assume that attractiveness and intelligence are mutually exclusive. And she's so powerfully actually both, I think, in the novel.
I agree. In the novel and in real life, like I think she's gorgeous. I mean, which
really
even
beautiful.
I feel kind of sexist saying it, but it's like when she was, you know, spoke at the Democratic convention in her white pantsuit. Like, oh my God, if I look like that in my late 60s, if I look like that in my late 40s, like I'd be overjoyed. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
One of the things that I really liked here is that you talk a lot about the work that Hillary does, particularly early on in her career. And I was so impressed by it because I knew that it was based on reality. And, you know, she investigates housing violations. She works with child services. She's a lawyer on the House Judiciary Committee, impeachment inquiry. She works for the National Children's Initiative, like researching how private schools are trying to avoid Brown versus Board of Education. And this is all like in her 20s. And I just feel completely, I'm like, okay, I didn't do anything. I have not even achieved what this woman has achieved by the time she was 28 years old. You know, like you realize what a worker she was.
Yeah, I mean, all I could like, amen to all of that. I mean, one, like I think that, you know, sometimes there's this sort of tendency, I think maybe for most of us, to feel like a famous person only exists when we're observing them. And so like a politician only exists when they're giving a speech. And, you know, they don't exist like eating a granola bar in an SUV, you know, between events, or like they don't exist brushing their teeth at night. And although I don't know, maybe social media is dispelling some of that, but yeah, so I do think that, like, you know, it can feel weirdly revelatory to show famous people in kind of mundane daily moments. But I also think, you know, I think real Hillary, like almost all of the kind of work she does is grounded in reality. And I mean, I'm sure you guys know that some people, there are these sort of two opposing views, which are this idea like, oh, Hillary would never have been able to run for Senate, and then, you know, never have been qualified to run for president if she hadn't been first lady, like if she hadn't been sort of riding Bill Clinton's coattails. And then I think the opposite viewpoint is, oh, like, you know, he was completely holding her back, and she was always the more talented one and the more impressive one, you know, from the time that she was like a Wellesley student or a law student. And I think, you know, probably the truth is somewhere in between, that like, I think they both, you know, probably helped each other and maybe had impulses that weren't in each other's best interests. But it's true. Doing research, I would sometimes think, like, you know, some of the people who think they don't like Hillary, I want to say, okay, can you recount her biography? Like, just tell me in a few sentences, like what she did in each decade. And there are some critics who I think could probably say, like, here, like, okay. And then, but I think a lot of people would be like, I don't know.
I think that one of the things that the book does, it's an alternate history, which presents this sort of better version of Hillary that voters would likely have been more receptive to, I think. But an alternate history means an alternate future. So I'm wondering, and this is something we asked our listeners, what do you think the world would look like if Hillary Rodham or Hillary Clinton would have won the 2016 election? Sad face.
Oh my goodness. Well, by the way, I feel like one thing I should say is that the fictional version of Hillary is, I mean, I admire her, and she's definitely supposed to be flawed and make bad decisions, as all of us sometimes do. And she's not supposed to be saintly or perfect. I don't think that would be realistic or interesting. I mean, I think that if she were, and I talk about this a little bit in the final, well, no, scratch that. I think that if she were president, you know, policy would be very different. Like I don't know. I mean, I do think about, you know, the 2016 election, and, you know, if you had said to me, like, what's the worst that could happen? It's hard to imagine that I would have been able to imagine a situation worse than like the one we're living in now in so many different ways. I mean, you know, just yeah, like in terms of the pandemic, or in terms of like the, you know, racism and the sexism coming out of the White House, and especially obviously we're talking right now in the week after George Floyd's death, just to have, I mean, I feel like you can't even say like leadership, like to have, you know, the sort of political, what I need a synonym that's not leader, like the political head of state. I mean,
well, it'd be nice to have a non-insane person running the country. I mean,
yeah,
you know, I mean, we have an insane person who lies constantly. One of the things that Hillary doesn't do in the book is lie very much. You know, I feel like that, and a lot of people in the public view see her as only a liar, right? But it seems clear to me that your fictional view of her psychologically is that that's not something that she does.
I think that is, I think that that's true. Like I sometimes think about if I like, you know, on my street, if one of my neighbors said, okay, that person who lives in the red house is really corrupt and dishonest. And then like, if the person said that, you know, once a week for 10 years or for 25 years. And then like, sometimes I interacted with that neighbor in the red house. And I thought like, maybe they're okay, but it's like how, like that's how I feel that there's been such a sort of, you know, level of criticism leveled at her for so long that inevitably some of it has stuck, even though very little of it is grounded in fact. And so a lot of people, including Democrats, have this kind of, you know, vague sense of like not totally liking her, not totally trusting her, like not thinking she was the right candidate for 2016, or like somehow it's uniquely her fault that Trump is president, instead of maybe approaching it from the outside and thinking like, what have we been told about her? When did that start? Like, who was the source of that?
So that's interesting because, yeah, I think we do get, right, and we see some version of this with Trump, right, that what is repeated eventually sticks in some way, even with people who we would think and hope would know better and then seemingly don't.
Also, I mean, she would not, regardless of your opinion on how much Hillary Clinton lies, as a politician, she would not decide that science is not real. She, you know, like I feel like empirical science is similar to, you know, like her work ethic, right? Like she wants to know how things really operate and try to work things according to the way that things should operate. She wants to have a plan. All of those things would be nice. Like we would have contact tracing and we would have a shitload of tests for everyone to take. And a lot less people would have died if she were president. You know, I mean, I just think that's, oddly enough, this pandemic is something that she would be very good at. I can imagine other things that she'd be bad at, but this would be something she'd be good at, I think.
I mean, I feel like she's very responsible. She's very prepared. She does her homework. You know, she sort of seeks out experts to, you know, get information that she doesn't have, which is just, like, I mean, a total opposite of the procedure that's like now in the White House.
And literally everything both of you just said could apply also to Elizabeth Warren, who is actually still pushing all of those things despite the fact that she didn't get the nomination. And so, which I think, you know, goes back to what you're suggesting essentially about how systemically maybe were directed to view women politicians, which isn't to say that either Hillary Clinton or Elizabeth Warren are flawless. Quite far from it. But
look at you bringing everything back around to the original idea.
Just Curtis makes it so easy. And Curtis, we really, really appreciate your coming on the show this week. It's a weird week here, and thanks for making the time. And we encourage our listeners to pick up a copy of Rodham. Curtis, thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. This was a pleasure. I like to think that I'm a friend of the podcast. Like, the way some people are friends of the Daily Show, or I like to think I'm
you're
a friend.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.